Hi everyone, Ford here from Son of a Stitch, and welcome to another episode of SonovaStitchToob and our series of unknown length on cross-stitch basics. In episode 1, I provided you with a pattern and showed you a little bit about how to read that pattern in order to make this project here, which we're all going to work on together. Today we're going to take some more information off of that pattern, and we're going to determine how big the project is going to be, how big of a piece of fabric we need, and how much floss we're going to use. We're also going to cut that fabric to the correct size. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at page 2 of that pattern. Now on any other pattern, it may not be page 2, it would be the information page that has all the colors and sizes on it. So if we look up at the top here, hopefully you've got it in front of you. Go back to episode 1 for the link if you're just started here with us. You'll notice that it gives you a designation of the size area up at the top. It tells us that this pattern is 26 by 42 stitches. Now, the industry standard is to give you width by height. So the first number is always going to be how wide it is. The second number is always going to be how tall it is. So this pattern is 26 stitches wide, 42 stitches tall. So how big that ends up is going to be determined by the fabric that we choose to use. Cross-stitching fabric comes in a few different types. Aida is the most common. It's a loose weave fabric with holes at regular intervals to make it easier to count. And it comes in different densities. So there's 14, 16, or 18 count density. What that number tells you basically is how many stitches per inch you're going to do on that fabric. So I'm going to recommend that we use 14 count fabric for this project, which is 14 stitches per inch. So we know how many stitches, and we know our stitches per inch, so all we have to do is divide those, and we'll know how many inches. This is like the 5th time I've tried to record this episode today, and it's now late evening, so it's beer 30. So we've got 26 stitches wide, and our fabric is 14 stitches per inch. So that means if we do the math, 26 divided by 14 is about 1.85. Now we're 42 stitches tall, and at 14 stitches per inch, once we do that division, we're 3 inches high. So we're going to wind up with our finished piece being 1.85 inches wide, 3 inches tall. So now we know how to figure out how big our project is going to be. And that equation is the same no matter how big the project or what the count of the fabric. So if we have a project that's 270 stitches wide and we use 18 count fabric on it, we know it's going to be 15 inches wide because we can do the math, and I'm good at that in my head. Hopefully I didn't fuck that up. Someone double check me. So that tells us how big it's going to be. Now for most projects, once we know the size of the project, we can use that to determine how big our fabric should be. So generally what I suggest is you take your project size and you add 6 inches. That's 3 inches on the left, 3 inches on the right, or 3 inches on the top and 3 inches on the bottom. That gives you enough room to put your hoop on there or to move it around inside a Q-snap. It also gives you the room that you're going to need to frame the project when you're done, or to put it in a hoop, however you're going to finish it. And it also accounts for some fucking up. Like you're probably going to miscount at some point. One time I had a project where I counted it all out, I cut it exactly how I needed it, and then I started stitching it in landscape when it should have been in portrait. Now because I gave myself those 3 inches, it actually just barely fit. But because it was so close to the edge on one side, I kept having to move my hoop around. I had to move my hoop around a lot. Not giving yourself a big allowance can mean moving your hoop around a lot or spending longer or more money getting it framed. And Aida is cheap. Aida's not very expensive. So give yourself the extra room. You'll maybe use an extra 50 cents worth of fabric, but you'll save hours of your time. And personally, my time is worth more than 50 cents worth of fabric. So just give yourself that extra 3 inches, which means total of 6. So if your project is going to be 8 by 10, your fabric should be 14 by 16. Give yourself all that extra space. Now for today's project, we're going to do things just a wee bit differently because it's so small that it'll fit all in a hoop at one time. So I've forgotten my hoop and I'm going to run and get it. Don't worry, I'll edit this out. Through the magic of editing, none of that will have happened. Oh, fucking hell. And we're back. Okay, so for this project, any hoop that will contain the entire project at once will do. And then we really just need our fabric to be big enough to fit that hoop, and then we won't ever have to move it during the stitching. So with this project only being 2 by 3 inches, I've decided I'm just going to use a 4-inch embroidery hoop. These guys cost about $2 at your local craft store. I have a whole drawer full of them because I buy them compulsively. So in order to fit in a 4-inch hoop and have enough fabric to be able to wrap around the hoop and pull it tight, I'm going to cut my fabric to 6 by 6 inches. I'm going to switch the camera angle here to show you a little bit about how I'm going to do that. Okay, now that you can see what I'm doing here, this is the kind of packaging that rolls of embroidery material will usually come in. The ones that come in the just little plastic bags with a cardboard header, the Storebrand ones, they suck. I usually caution against buying them. I know that they're cheaper and that that's really tempting, but I've had instances on multiple occasions of finding out that when I looked closely at the fabric and counted the number of stitches one direction versus the number of stitches in another direction, they were not the same. So I had a project that relied pretty heavily on one of the elements being circular, and when I was done it was not circular, and I was extremely upset. I recommend Charles Craft, Zweigart, or one of the other major brands. The Storebrand ones at the craft store will burn you. So we've decided based on the materials that we're going to use, namely this 4-inch embroidery hoop, that a 6 by 6 piece of Veda will be sufficient. So all we need to do there is measure out our 6 inches. Our handy dandy ruler here. This ruler was in my desk when I started my old job, and then I liked it so much that when I quit, I stole it. It's my ruler now. Alright, so we just need to measure out 6 inches. And one of the nice things about embroidery fabric is that it's got these little straight lines of dots in it. So those holes actually form a nice straight line relative to the fabric. Now, one of the things that I learned when I was really into woodworking, and that still holds true in cross-stitching, in addition to measure twice, cut once, is never trust a factory edge. The manufacturer's cutters often don't quite cut in straight lines, and they're really uneven. So generally, before I start with a piece of fabric, I'll actually cut along one of these rows of holes in order to give myself an edge that I know to be straight. I forgot my scissors, so again, I'm going to edit out my mistake. I'll be right back. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to make ourselves a nice little nick here at the 6-inch point. Just rolling up fabric. If you're really fastidious, you can get out your iron and iron this first so that it'll stop rolling up on you. And I'm a bit fastidious like that, but not today. So we just make a little nick here, boop, at the 6-inch point, because we don't need a straight line. We don't need to draw a line because we can just follow the straight line that's already there. And then we make another little nick at 6 inches here. And then if your scissors are sufficiently fancy, you can just do this. Haha! Just kidding, that was an editing trick. Okay, in case it wasn't obvious. Alright. Important step right there. Don't forget to take a drink of your beer. And there we have our 6 by 6 inch piece of Aida. Alright, so now that we've determined how big our project is going to be, how big the piece of fabric needs to be, and we've cut that to size for our hoop, now we need to figure out how much embroidery floss we're going to need. So if we go back to the key of our pattern, it tells us how many stitches we use of each color. Now most patterns will also give you this information. My patterns also tell you how many skeins of that color you're going to need. A standard skein of DMC floss is 8 meters. Not all pattern designers provide you with this information, however, and especially on bigger patterns, that can be a problem. You need to know how much you're going to use in order to be able to kit the project out. Because this is such a common question that I see in a lot of the online cross-stitch communities that I frequent, I've gone ahead and made a tool to help you with this. So if you go to this web address right here, bit.ly/flossmath, you'll find a spreadsheet. I'm a nerd and I love spreadsheets. This spreadsheet is going to do all of your project calculations for you. So on page 1, you're going to put in your stitch dimensions of your finished project. You're going to put in the count, the stitch density of the fabric that you're going to use, and then a couple of other pieces of information such as how many strands of floss you're going to use. Deciding how many strands to do is something that can affect the style and the look of the project. Again, because I'm nice, I've actually told you on the project right here. Right after the symbols, there's a little 2 in brackets. On my patterns, that's telling you use 2 strands. So then once we move on to page 2 of the spreadsheet, we're going to put in all of our colors and how many stitches of each. And then on page 3 of the spreadsheet, it's going to give us a shopping list. How big of a piece of fabric we need to buy, how many skeins of each color that we're going to use we need to buy. You can print that out, take it to the store with you when you kit up your project. Now, we don't need to do that with this project because we know what colors we're using and we know that we only need 1 skein of each. In all of these instances, we need less than 1/10 of 1 skein for each of them. It's a very small project. So just get 1 skein or a scrap of each of the colors that's used, and that'll be enough to complete this project. So now that we know what materials we're going to need and have gotten everything all gathered together, in our next episode, I'm going to talk to you about using a hoop. I'm going to show you some tips and tricks for how to do that. I'm going to show you how to figure out where to start on your pattern. I'm going to show you how to figure out where to start on your fabric, and we're going to get that fabric loaded up into the hoop in order to prepare for stitching. So that'll be next time on SonovaStitchToob. Thank you for joining me. You can find me on Facebook at SonovaStitchXS, X-Ray Sierra, or you can find me on Instagram at SonovaStitch, and of course my store, sonovastitch.etsy.com, is where I sell all of my patterns and my accessories. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.